the March 11, 2013 public meeting of the Fayette County Area Planning Commission to order. Would you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call.
Jerry Gobin.
Here.
Zane Bedore.
Here.
Mark Flum.
Here.
Ed Harrell.
Here.
Carl Hilton. Jason Waterman.
Here.
Gabe Nobby.
Here.
Brian Jennings.
Here.
James Barrett.
Here.
All the board members are here except Carl Hilton.
Okay. Next on our agenda is the approval of minutes of the January 14, 2013 APC meeting and the February 11, 2013 minutes.
Motion to approve the 2 months minutes. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Same sign. Okay. And it's passed. Next on our agenda, public hearing is the zoning code amendment with major revision of section 153.39, the administration. Amendments include the following new provisions and provisions relocated from other area zoning code sections. Section F, successive applications. New provision previously located only in the APC Rules of Procedure. G, Site Plan Review and Technical Advisory Committee. This is a new provision. H, Special Exception Permits, moved from Section 153.24 for special exceptions. I, Home Occupations, moved from Section 153.35, Home Occupations. J, Interpretations, Appeals, and Variances, moved from Section 153.40, Board of Zoning Appeals, and amended. And K, Amendments. This is a new provision previously located in APC Rules of Procedure and Indiana Code. Bill?
Okay, before I get started with a brief overview to begin with, I'd like to mention to the board members that the board members who've been on, the Plan Commission members who've been around longer know that this is expedited a little bit more quickly than I typically do with these ordinances. So we haven't had the multiple eyes going over it the way we typically do. So after we review, I would not be offended if board members would then table the amendment for the next month, because there's an awful lot of information here, and although most of the information that's in here I was able to get to the board members previously, and what I have right here is all the missing parts are inserted, which are mostly procedural. And as you go through the ordinance, everything that is in black ink is the original text, or in some cases the original heading. Everything that is in the red is amended language. So like I said, there's an awful lot there. There's 24 pages of information, 24 pages, and there is an awful lot to absorb. And so just want to go briefly, and the typical ordinance language, which at the top of the pages is going to be as the ordinance goes to the county council, the county commissioners and the city council. So the first set of amendments is the special exceptions, and it's hereby amended with the special exceptions. B, procedure for approval. C, existing use may be a conforming use. And D, temporary certificates. Those were moved to the administrative section. Okay, then the following section was deleted and renamed with E, special exceptions and districts where they may be permitted. That was changed to B. And F, other requirements for special exceptions, that's replaced with C with the same text. And that's because the B, C, and D were removed, so we're just renaming to keep them in a rational order. Okay, the section 2 is the amendment to the home occupations, and it's the procedure for approval is relocated to the it's deleted from the home occupation exceptions, and it's relocated to the administrative section of the then the third is with the administration section. I'll go into more detail with that. But there's a fourth actual section, and this is the Board of Zoning Appeals. And what that's doing is that's deleting the sections on variances. Section F, variances from development standards of zoning code. G, variances from use district or classification not granted. H, variances in floodplain district. And I, appeals the board on the grounds of transmission of record, disposition, and a writ of certiorari. Those are all being relocated to the administrative section. And in particular, the writ of certiorari that has been changed by Indiana statute, and that's no longer how the zoning board decisions are reviewed. They're now reviewed in court just like any other government action. And the reason for those particular changes is it's an attempt to get all the administrative procedures that are scattered throughout the area zoning code into one location. And it's pretty typical, and many more zoning codes are attempting to do this. It makes it easier for the staff to use, plan commission members to use, zoning board members, and also members of the public to use the ordinance if it's in one location, not scattered all over. Now the third amendment, which is the largest, okay, that's over the administration section. Now, much of what has happened in the administration section is there's a lot of existing text, but it was reorganized into a series of several more topical areas, such as the enforcement officer, which is the responsibility of the director, basic duties of the executive director, the responsibility, and improvement location permits, certificate of occupancy, and those were scattered through various locations, and there really wasn't a rational order within the administration section. So those have just been reorganized, and the text has all remained the same. Now we get to...
Question here. So
Yes, sir.
some of this red language is actually not new language, it's just moved from another place?
Okay, yeah, some of it is actually moved from like the rules of procedure.
Okay.
But it's all new to actually being within the text of the zoning code. Mm-hmm. And some of the sections, it's replaced language that was already in there for some particular items, and other places. And so this is where we get into the, okay, first one is, now as we get into the part on administration, the responsibility of the executive director. What we do have that's new right there is related to the setting of public hearings and meetings.
What page is that, Bill?
Okay, that's on the page 3. I apologize for that. And what this is new information, but what this is doing, this is stating within the actual zoning code rather than the rules of procedure, is the number of days prior to a public meeting, which basically all paperwork has to be in the area plan commission office. And it makes it easier for people to use when all that is right there in that one location in the zoning code. Okay, the hearings and meetings for all applications, part B, that was already, the heading was already there, but it's actually new text. And the text that was used is to make it, the previous text really didn't spell out as clearly as it should as far as setting up the times and the hearings for the meetings. And then the hearings on all applications. One thing we do have, there was a small reference in the zoning code previously, but we actually, it spelled out more specifically the notice to the interested parties. And there's more detail on the interested parties that was in the rules of procedure, but it's more appropriate for these procedural items, especially when they're called for in the Indiana code, to be located in the zoning code. And the content of notice, okay, that was expanded and replaced what was already in the zoning code. And the referral of applications, that just makes it more clear what the actual process is as the area plan commission staff refers any applications, whether it would be for the zoning board, plan commission, or the technical advisory committee. Okay, then the conduct of hearings, that's new. And then the examination and copying of applications and other documents. This is just making clear what's actually in the Indiana code as far as the people's rights to get the information, the Freedom of Information Act. As I said, Section D, that's all the same information, same thing with E, the certificate of occupancy. Now, one thing that is a new section, it had references only in the rules of procedure, which is anywhere typically found in the actual zoning code, is the successive applications. And what the successive applications is, it states that after an action has been, say something's been turned down, whether it's the zoning board, the area plan commission, whether it's or the, say the county commissioners or the city council on a rezone. And what's just stating clearly that unless there's significant changes to the application, it's not eligible to be reheard for one year from the rejection. And that language was in the rules of procedure, but it really should be in the zoning code. And then it states clear when someone is a successive application that new grounds must be stated. And then on the part of the director, the next part is a summary denial with or without hearing. And then there's states when the actual exception is when something has been filed less than 1 year. Okay, now G, that's the Site Plan Review and Technical Advisory Committee. And this is what came out of the request to try to avoid a future replay of the sidewalks issue up there along Western Avenue. Now, what this would do is, by having a site plan review, the Technical Advisory Committee, okay, this grants an authority for the approval of the approval of an application is for the Technical Advisory Committee to either approve the site plan, okay, can recommend, make a positive recommendation for the site plan, but provided the following changes are made, or it can actually, reject the site plan if it falls completely short of meeting the requirements of the zoning code and the comprehensive plan. And people have asked why this is actually necessary. It's because you can't, for example, use the example Walmart, is the way the zoning code is written right now. All someone has to do is meet the very basic requirements of the zoning code, which is they provide enough parking, the signs meet the sign regulations, they have the lots large enough, they provide the actual, it meets the drainage requirements, say of the county drainage board or the city drainage, and you have to say yes. So you don't have the authority to take in consideration how much traffic is going to be generated. Is this going to require traffic light? So had we had this in place with the Walmart project, two things could have happened. One would have been we could have required traffic generation studies, including how much traffic is along currently are projected to change along Western Avenue. And then based on that, you could then put in place a requirement to, as part of your approval, to have the traffic light where it now is. And,
Bill, I have a question.
yeah, sure.
So when we initiated this at the city council, we were talking about from the standpoint of having all commercial entities install a sidewalk.
Exactly.
Can't we just change the zoning code so that it says if you build a new commercial entity, it has to have a sidewalk of these specifications, whatever they are?
Okay. Well, this is, you could possibly do something like that, but this is what gives you actual authority to say, we want this, at this particular point, of, say, particular dimensions along this lane. Because another thing that this would allow you to do, it goes well beyond just the sidewalk. What this does is it allows you to take into consideration the movement of traffic. Well, based on the amount of traffic is, we need to be provided the traffic light. Or there's gonna be enough traffic that a deceleration lane might be required. Because there might be a need for, as there is up north, to continue water and sewer south from Walmart down to 37th Street, you then have in place that, well, in exchange for this approval, we need an easement not only to allow the sidewalk, but also to allow to allow sufficient room for the extension of the water lines and the sewer lines from this point to that point. So it's much more than just the sidewalk.
That's my concern. So why don't we just make changes for easements, for utilities and that, because this is awful big to me and gives a lot of power to people in the future.
Well, the idea with this is that you want to have control over the quality of development. And because we've all seen there's been a lot of bad development in the city of Connersville that could have been better. This gives you the opportunity to improve aspects of the development.
So it's basically, instead of just meeting the requirements, the basic requirements, it's, hey, let's study it and let's see what other effects it's gonna have later on down the
Exactly,
road.
you're
as
looking
far
at the
as-
overall impact of a development.
Okay.
And it takes into consideration how it's gonna affect neighboring property uses, things along those lines. So,
I've got a question for you.
yes, sir.
So we're saying Walmart now is, they were exempt because of the way the code was. So if I'm the unfortunate individual that, say, buys that barn down there, and I decide I want to develop, am I going to be required to run a sidewalk from 37th Street up to in front of my business?
No, you can't require someone to build a sidewalk on someone else's property. But as those properties are developed, you
But that's my
have-
question. If I develop where that barn sits, south of Walmart, and say I put in a good-sized building there, am I going to be required under this to run a sidewalk from 37th Street up past my place of business?
only along the land that you control.
So all I have to do is cover my frontage?
That's it, yeah, because you don't have the authority to tell someone else to put something on someone else's property.
Okay. Now, another scenario.
Yep.
If I develop south of where that storage place is, across from the old Visteon building, that's still within the city limits, what would happen under this scenario with this being passed? I just require sidewalks in front of my frontage?
See, this is where having the technical advisory committee in place is, because it may not necessarily be, it may be deemed not necessary at every single development to have a sidewalk. See, that gives an actual discretion to, if necessary, say, at this particular location, you don't need it. If you then mandate every property that's developed as commercial property shall have a sidewalk of X dimensions, it's then in order to remove that and to get permission not to put those in, is you then have to then go before the Board of Zone Appeals to get a variance from the development standards.
But what I'm saying though, what you're saying is basically you're going back and you're saying it's going to be up to this committee to decide if this would have to take place if I have to run this sidewalk. Isn't that what's got us in trouble in the first place? Because we briefly discussed last meeting about all these subdivisions that we have that's in the city limits that has no sidewalk.
And that would be
Because
then,
we're exempting them evidently when we're approving their plans
yeah, it wasn't
from
required at
curbs,
that time.
sidewalks, and
Yeah, yeah, so this is where that plan review comes in, because when you have that in place, now because right now subdivisions do have the same type of committee already and does exist, and it's for subdivisions. Now, what this is just doing, it's allowing this particular technical advisory committee with a little more authority to review more types of development, rather than just a residential subdivision. Because really what we had up in that area of where Walmart is at is it was a commercial subdivision. But as it stood within the zoning code, something commercial like that wasn't required to go through a subdivision process. Ours only applies to the residential. So that's part of the picture. But all these along with this, and then things within the subdivision regulations, they all end up fitting together. But, yeah, because the idea is that you want a certain amount of discretion to say that this really isn't required at this location. Say, it might be in an industrial district that's way out there, or there might be something that's a development someplace else. But,
So instead of having a blanket statement, everyone should have sidewalks. For some people that don't have to do it if it falls under that's what the committee would investigate it and say they really don't need one.
yeah, and one thing that some jurisdictions do have that have requirements for sidewalks is there's leeway that's granted with the technical advisory committee that because it's a slow process with actual development, that as you start developing the actual parcel, but it hasn't been built out, that it gives a window of installing, say, sidewalks. Then when the sidewalk is required, then the developer is required to install the sidewalk. But it does grant that type of discretion also to the advisory committee.
The other question I had real quick was the technical advisory committee, someone asks for something they want done and the advisory committee has to sit, they have a certain amount of time they have to give their findings back, or is it just,
Yeah,
because I mean, they could delay a project at some point if.
there's a limitation on the time for review.
Okay.
It's in there, I don't recall what it is right offhand. But what's required is
I
that,
see 14 days.
yeah. And so what's required is that
Saw it somewhere.
the applicant is also at the meeting. So it's not done behind their back.
Page 3.
This is actually announced, it's a public meeting. So all the scheduled technical advisory committees, just the way every plan commission is required to be legally scheduled, same thing with the advisory committee.
Okay.
Bill, I have another question on this.
Yeah, sure.
Does this give them the power for that committee to approve whether or not the facades match? Because I know I've seen it was either in this draft or the one you brought in from Noblesville.
Yeah.
That would give the potential.
Well, that isn't in this one. And so it was, looked as that, anything with the facades, that isn't in this one right here. Because the things with Noblesville is, that was included because that was the ordinance that a lot of this was actually pulling from. And it went well beyond this to just the site plan to then actually a architectural review.
And I see there's something here about lighting. So that you can actually.
Yeah, so, well, one of the ideas of the lighting also is that as you develop a site, and when you need to develop in the way which is, it isn't going, for example, the site's adjacent to residentially zoned area. So that the lighting that's going to be used is going to be downcast lighting where it's not going to then cause light pollution or nuisance on neighboring properties. And then with the issue of the airport, that's a critical concern because you have to be careful with the lighting that's used so it doesn't mimic and confuse during night operations with the airport.
So how much authority, Bill, will the technical advisory committee have? How much authority?
Okay, okay. Now, what we have with it's a review and recommend primarily. It's I have in there, someplace toward the end of this. But it's the larger projects. I think I broke it down into under 1 acre. Most things are staff review unless, of course, it's on a major arterial, and that's primarily how it fits in with traffic and road cuts. Okay, so otherwise it's staff. Then between 1 and 5 acres, it's, this can be actually approved by the Technical Advisory Committee. If there's changes, it can then be forwarded to the Area Plan Commission for final approval. And if they say no, of course, it can actually be appealed, by the applicant. Now, the things that happen on the large projects that exceed 5 acres, and those would actually go for the final approval of the Area Plan Commission. Now, one of the reasons I chose those particular 3 cutoffs is it's related to, how many people are familiar with Rule 5 of IDEM? This has to do with the sedimentation and erosion control regulations. Now, under 1 acre, there is no requirement for what is called a Rule 5. And it's primarily a notification process. So between the 1 and the 5 acres, that is at what's called a local, MP, what is it, authority, Jerry? But there's a local authority that reviews and then approves the sedimentation plan, erosion and sedimentation plans. And in the city, within the jurisdiction of the City of Connersville and Connersville Utilities, that's Connersville Utilities. And then outside of the corporate areas, that's the Soil and Water Conservation District Board. And then everything above that, above the 5 acres, all requires notification with IDEM. So it's a natural, it relates naturally to already some other state regulations. So the larger project is, the more potential for not only erosion impacts, sedimentation impacts, but other impacts such as traffic, lighting, things along those lines.
Bill, real quick.
Yeah.
Just back to the sidewalk. Mr. Hamilton's business is being put up in town, up in the industrial park right now. If this was in place, he would have to put a sidewalk unless it goes to this advisory board and they eliminate it. Now, question, what if we have an explosion of business up there? And I mean, all those lots get sold and everything, and we don't have any sidewalk, we've excluded him. Do we have any right to go back and say, okay, now with the explosion of businesses, we got all these sidewalks being put in, can we request that he put one?
Okay, this would be where what I referred to is that you can delay the implementation until it is necessary. So you still have, a part of the approval is the requirement for the sidewalk, but it doesn't have to go in now because there is no,
There is no
practical reason for it.
need for it right now, but it could be in the future.
Exactly.
Okay,
And these are things that have to be written into the actual approval.
okay, all right.
And just to let everybody know is that right now we're working with one particular developer. I
Yes.
can't really talk about the project, and then with another one. And these developers are surprised that we don't have this type of a process. I have people come into town. They want me to set up plan review meetings because they want to go through this with everybody that's involved. And so what we're doing isn't really out of the line, something like this. It's the developers are used to it elsewhere, and the other aspect that it gives them a process they can, understand and then work with. It's so it's, like I said, this really isn't.
So we're not inventing the wheel.
No,
People do this.
People do this.
Absolutely, like I said, and developers ask me about this, and they're shocked when we don't have a plan review process. And one we're dealing with right now asked me why we don't.
Would it be correct to say that this documentation here has evolved as a result of somebody thinking they needed a sidewalk up to the new Walmart store? Is that what started this?
That's what gave it this final push. If you remember when we were working on some of the reformatting, we had discussions about working in and
But
something.
this
with
really
review.
developed when somebody said there should have been a sidewalk put in.
That was
If I-
that's the final kick in the seat, yeah.
Oh, okay. And if I'm understanding what you're saying, even if this had been in place, there wouldn't have been a sidewalk put in up to Walmart,
Not the full length, correct.
Not the full length.
Not all the way to.
just up there.
So, yeah, because what this is just doing is giving the Area Plan Commission the authority over a specific project on their actual property. So there's still the issue of, as the other properties develop that are south, which, so as those are actually developed, we can then have those in place.
So the advisory board will make their their authority would just be to advise, and the area plan would still make a decision on whether yes or no.
And they do have some direct authority to approve without forwarding to the Area Plan Commission on if something meets every requirement of the zoning code. Any more questions on this section? Okay. Now, the next section is on the special exception permits. And what this has done, it's the first part is purpose, it just expanded on the small explanation of the purpose for the special exception permits. And since we have some other things that are going on a little bit, I'll just read off what the purpose is so people get an idea. Special exception permits are required for land uses that, due to the characteristics of a use, have the potential to have a negative effect on neighboring land uses and within the jurisdiction of the Area Plan Commission. Requiring special exceptions for certain uses in specific locations are necessary for the preservation of property values as well as, found one error right there, as well as promoting the public health, safety, comfort, morals, and general welfare in Fayette County. And that's a typical clause that's found multiple locations in not only this area zoning code, but zoning codes all over, and indeed a lot of various other government regulations, basis of police powers for any board or entity. Expanded on the description of the authority. That's for the zoning board. Okay, what it spells out is what's new in this is the parties entitled to seek a special exception, and it just makes clear that it's only those that have the owner, the lessee, or of the subject property, or any person that has a legal or equitable interest in the subject property. And these are things that are all actually understood. They're in the Indiana Code, but you're finding a lot more of these type of items actually in the zoning codes. Procedure for review statement, that's the same. And then it's just a section on the applications. Okay, and the actions by the Area Plan Commission office, it just expands that. Includes in the technical advisory committee, because on special exceptions where they will have a role, if adopted. Okay, the public hearing and notice, action by the Board of Zone Appeals, the period of time to act, and then the legal review. And then what remains is the criteria that already adopted in the zoning code for for approving a special exception. And shortly, it's one of the reasons I did suggest that we can also consider tabling until next week is because the request that has been forwarded from county commissioners has an amendment to the specific language. And so if this is going to be adopted, that should probably be taken into consideration next month when the other amendment is considered. Okay. And then it just, the next section is the home occupations, and this is really just spelling out more the purpose and the authority. Once again, the party's entitled to seek a home occupation. And one difference that we have right here is that unless the property for a home occupation application is owned by the property owner, the leasee, person holding the leaseholder must also, the application must also be signed by the property owner. Okay, then the procedure is pretty much the same. And then the requirements for approval. Okay, now we have the next section is interpretations of appeals and variances. There's a very small reference to this that's found in the zoning board section, but a lot of the language with the zoning board, the authorities and the responsibility are still there. But this was moved to this section because of the because it's administrative. And the first part, and it more clearly spells out the reasons for these three primary responsibilities, these three responsibilities of the zoning board. It says the purpose for interpretations, and this is when someone comes to me as the director for an interpretation of a section of the zoning code. Now, what this makes clear is that for it to be an actual official interpretation, I need to give it in writing. And now, I always, when people request interpretation, I always suggest that, let me give it to you in writing. And then I explain that if you do not like the interpretation, you have the right to appeal. But this puts that language actually in the zoning code. Okay, then it highlights the parties that are entitled to seek the interpretation. And what's important with this is it's by someone who has a legal interest in a property, and it has to be for a specific project. It can't be a hypothetical. And because I get a lot of hypothetical questions, and I refuse to answer those, because because you have the potential of answering a hypothetical for people trying to tie you down and commit you to something. And it's not good, not a good thing to do. Then it's just a procedure for the review and the decision. And then, of course, the appeals. Okay, then what this provides that it didn't have before is the standards for interpreting myself, and then also the zoning board for issuing interpretations. So it makes clear what's implied about what you have to consider when you're making an interpretation. But this really spells out what you have to do. You know, there's 5 things you need to take into consideration when you make the interpretation. So you need to make it clear, and basically this is the idea is to helps you make legally defensible decisions is one of the terms that's used with within the planning community and also land use attorneys. Okay, then there's the effect of the favorable interpretation and also limitations. Then we get into the part with the appeals, which is the crux of the name of the Board of Zoning Appeals. And it really didn't have spell out the reason for the appeals, but the appeal procedure is provided as a safeguard against arbitrary, ill-considered, or erroneous administrative decisions. It is intended to avoid the need for legal action by establishing local procedures to review and correct administrative errors. It is not intended as a means to desert the clear purposes, meaning and intent of the area zoning code and subdivision regulations, or the rightful authority of the executive director to enforce the requirements of these regulations. To these ends, the reviewing body should give all proper deference and spirit to the intent embodied in the area zoning code and the subdivision regulations, and to the reasonable interpretation of that language by those charged with the administration of the area zoning code and the subdivision regulations. And this is the type of language that really was missing from the zoning code. It makes it very clear, why it exists. And then it's goes through the actual filing process, the authority, parties entitled to the appeal. Okay, then it has the actual procedure. And then it gets down to the bottom once again right here, the legal review, which is just makes reference to the Indiana Code section that covers the review of zoning and planning board decisions. And one thing that does state that it has in the Indiana code, which we did not have. There's the right to grant a variance and deciding appeals. The next part is the variance from the development standards. And this is the one that the zoning board primarily sees. And once again, it just states the authority. The party's entitled to seek the variance, the review. Okay, then what this gets into is the findings of fact for the variance from the development standards. And what I did is I highlighted the various items that really are actually, a lot of these are the same items that are in the zoning code, but it's just different language, and it's more descriptive of when it says hardship, what does it mean by hardship? What does it mean by unique physical condition? Because these are all in the current criteria, but they really aren't spelled out. Okay, then it makes reference to that's from the previous, still pre-existing language. It's the variance in a floodplain district. Okay, and then it specifically states in the conditions on variances, which is necessary to have that language so that the zoning board does have the authority to place those conditions. Now, the last part is amendments. And what this does is, this is a new section. And I think that anybody who's been through either this board or any legislative body, is that when it comes to, this covers both code amendments and then also zoning map amendments. And it just makes clear what the purpose is, what the authority is, the parties to initiate the amendments, which are both the text, and then the next part is the amendments to the zoning map. Then the standards for amendments, and then the procedure for review and decision. Now, these items are, like I said, all of these things that are included in this section are found in two locations: our rules of procedure and the Indiana code. And the idea is to have those things that are really important to have it in your zoning code. So I think people have seen how I've had to go from here, there, back and forth to spell out everything that has to happen. And unfortunately, there was one time where I did make an error in interpretation. So this will help me avoid something like that. Okay, that is the crux of it. There's an awful lot. Like I said, I would really feel comfortable, more comfortable if the board would table this so they can really familiarize myself in this. Because if there's things that can be combined or things that might be able to be excised, or there's some issues with some of the language, we can amend them next month. Because all it takes is then having those and then voting on each amendment to this language. And it won't have to be tabled at that point. So if each amendment is actually amended one item at a time, those can then be included in the approved amendment, which those would be inserted and then forwarded to the legislative bodies. Like I said, I did this a lot more rapidly than I would really have liked to, and then without having the actual review. So that's one of the reasons I really would like the board members to go through this before,
See, you want a motion to table it?
that would be a real good idea. And unless anybody has some other questions in the meantime concerning this, or comments.
I'll move the table this next meeting.
I'll second.
We got a motion and a second. Roll call.
Okay, Jerry Gobin,
Yes.
Zane Bedore,
Yes.
Mark Plum,
Yes.
Ed Harrell,
Yes.
Carl Hilton. Sorry, he's not here. Jason Waterman,
Yes.
Gabe Nobby,
Yes.
Brian Jennings,
Yes.
James Barrett.
Okay, and please, if you have any personal questions, anything like that, is call me, stop by the office, and because I want to talk to you these things. And so such as some of the concerns that Mr. Nobby has already shown. But before I forget, I'd like to say that is, tomorrow, I will be out of town at a building code class. Trying to get back up to speed with that, so I'll be up in Indianapolis. And on Friday, I'll be out of the office for it's a legal seminar for the State Planning Association. So Tuesday and Friday, I'll be out of the office. Anybody that's out there watching, I will be in the office on Wednesday and Thursday. And those 2 days I was out last week, I came back, there were 24 messages. So I didn't lose just 2 days by buggering up my finger, because I probably lost about a half day then just taking the messages and then returning messages. So I lost a lot more time than I would have liked to.
I know we voted to table this, but I'd like to just make a comment on page 10,
Yes,
where it talks about the Technical Advisory Committee
Yes.
membership,
yes,
the APC and the BZA at the very top.
Yep.
One commission member appointed from membership to act as chair.
yep,
A second APC member who shall be the surveyor. And then the third one says one member of the area Board of Zoning Appeals.
Yep.
Should that also say who is not a member of the APC?
yeah, I think that would be good.
Okay.
Thank you, Ed. Okay. All right.
Okay, anything else for Bill?
Okay. Now, I think everybody has a copy, I think, of the ordinance that was proposed, well, that's forwarded from the county commissioners to the area plan commission. And what we've asked is that Mr. White from the hospital do you mind if I just say that right now it's a real mouthful to say the whole proper title? But to go ahead and fill us in with this, and what it's really saying and what it's intending to do.
Yeah.
Okay. Help yourself. Yeah.
My name's Randy White. I'm the president and CEO of the hospital, and I've got about 2 hours worth of information to give you, but I'm going to condense it and try to make it as understandable as possible. And I'm not saying that you're daft or solid. What I'm saying is after a master's degree in healthcare, a master's degree in business, and 16 years in healthcare, I'm just now starting to understand the way the government finances things. So it's a very complex situation, but let's try to understand it. A couple months ago, there was a process that went through here asking for a rezoning issue to be done. And this ended up, we had no notice that came through here, and this ended up at the county commissioners where we had discussion. It is our intent to put an amendment in there to give more discovery to the issue. And here's the reason why. We're not talking let businesses compete. We're not talking Exxon and Chevron across the street, who's got the best price of Pepsis and potato chips and the brightest gas and to keep you out of the weather when it's raining. Healthcare is a completely different monster. You ought to look at the hospital as an essential service, the same way you do your fire department, your police department, and everything else. And let me explain why, and let me explain the differences. Our hospital is under a code called 501c3, which is a non-for-profit entity. To be able to be open as a hospital entity and to accept Medicare and Medicaid and other federal and state funding, we have to accept, and this is the key premise to all this, we have to accept anyone and everyone, no matter of race, religion, creed, or ability to pay, that comes into our ER. That is a heavy burden, especially in a county that has very high unemployment. 10% of all the people that come to our ER have no ability to pay us. None. Now, where we differed and where we disagreed with what happened, knowing that we're a 501c3 and we have to accept all those ER patients, And we have to find ways to finance that care to allow another corporation to come in, although they are a hospital and their main facility. In this case, the main hospital in Richmond, Virginia is 501c3 too. But what they proposed was not to bring their ER services down here, it was to bring a different line of business down here. Now let's take it a little bit deeper. Just to keep the math easy, say that our cost is $100 for every ER visit. Medicare might pay $90, they don't cover cost. Medicaid may pay $80. Champus or military may pay $50. The no pays, of course, we get nothing unless, say, the insurance people pay 102% of the cost. The difference in the financing mechanism of allowing that 30,000 square foot building to come here is simply this. They can pick and choose. And what do I mean by that? When you go to your primary care doctors, they want to see your insurance card and they want that copay up front, if there is a copay. If you don't have that, the doctor doesn't say, well, come on back and we'll figure it out later. He says, we won't take you at a clinic. You just don't roll into a clinic and walk in like you do in the ER. There's just two different mechanisms. The facility that was being considered was other mechanisms they would be allowed to pick and choose. And on record during that meeting, they noted they did not want to help take care of the ER burden here. So we've got two different types of situations happening. One where you can pick and choose, and you're not going to pick and choose to lose money. It's something you're going to pay $12 to $15 million to put up. But you're putting the burden, in this case, back on a super value. Now let me explain why I think your hospital here is a super value. We don't get any county money. We're not county supported. We're one of the few hospitals in this state that's not owned by the county or part of a large conglomerate. This is very important. The reason I say that is this. In 2008, when we lost $4.8 million, in 2009, 3.9, in 10 we lost 3.1, in 2011 we lost 2.7, but last year we turned it around and made $1.6 million. I'm happy to say we're ahead of budget again this year. But why this is a tremendous value? You've got an essential service that you have no financial liability on. We're having to manage it. The reason I say it's an incredible value, instead of outsourcing a lot of the things that we could do or being owned by a conglomerate such as IU Health or St. Vincent's or Columbia Healthcare or any of the other 50 million groups out there, when that money comes in, it stays here in the county. Because I don't have to write a check to send it down to Brentwood to ask them, can I have $100,000 back because we need new doors on the wall? Now, how much money staying here? The great thing about the hospital is we're in the export business. We give great care. I've shared numbers with some of the people on this board. One of the highest value-based hospitals in the state is our hospital up here, period. But when I take care of anybody, especially since we take care of over 70% Medicare and Medicaid patients, that's our payer mix, and all hospitals differ. I can go down that road a little later. But on the point, when we do this, and we are taking care of these people, we're sending the bill to Washington, D.C. to bring tax dollars back to this county. When we take care of Medicaid person, we're billing the State House to send in partial state money, taxes, and partial federal money. That is very important because here are some of the numbers that we're talking about. The hospital itself, through the Indiana Hospital Association, our impact solely on what we bring in is $52 million to this community. With incremental spending, because when you put $10 in the bank, it doesn't stay there, they use it to make 2 or 3 loans. That's the multiplier. You've heard the money multiplier, right? The hospital's multiplier, as done by the American Hospital Association and the Indiana Hospital Association, is that $52 million creates another $33 million worth of business and transactions. Our 520 employees create another 314 incremental jobs. And what do I mean by that? They pay taxes. They help put the policemen on the road. They buy gas. They buy bread. They buy things which help employ other people. I know that when we buy carpeting, it's done local. Our cabinetry is done local. We buy as much locally, and I'm gonna tell you why, because that's my preference, but it helps the people who help us. Specifically put, $29.4 million is spent at that hospital on 20th Street that goes to salaries and wages and fringe benefits. That's a lot of exporting. That's a ton of exporting. So let's talk about that payer mixture, man, because this is a critical point that I've got to make, and this is just the complexity of it all. If you and I are in Hollywood, California, we have a hospital, I'm going to say the vast majority of people have insurance. And as I told you earlier, insurance pays higher than cost. That's why if you're an insured person, you keep seeing your rates go up and up and up, because the insured people pay for the ones who don't have the insurance. I don't know how else to tell you the honest truth. But here in Connersville, we have over 70% Medicare and Medicaid. Remember me telling you those numbers? They don't cover costs, and that's easy to Google. They don't cover costs, and certainly the people that come to the ER. And understand, by the law, if that person who's hurt and has no insurance is very hurt, they can't leave the hospital until I've given them the greatest care possible and discharge them like anyone else. So if we spend $30,000 or $40,000 on and they can't pay, we have to write it off. Now, why is what we're doing pretty amazing, but still fragile? I'll show you a graph that I presented to one of the mayor's conferences. You can kind of see right here, starting in 2008 when the federal and the federal and state economy started going south, that red line's our charity care. Of the $52 million that we billed in 2008, $2.5 million was written off because people did not have the ability to pay. What I'm getting at is the hospital can compete on value. The hospital can compete on quality. We have no problem with that. But we can't compete on disproportionate services. One entity cannot take care of what is, I mean, let's go a little deeper here. This county has the 89th worst healthcare score. And I'm talking about the use of alcohol, the use of tobacco, single-parent families. I'm talking about kids not having the right diet or the amount of food that they need. Those are some pretty harsh numbers. We're talking about obesity. Our uninsured is 54% higher than the rest of the state. We've got fewer college graduates here in this town, lower birth weights. These are not things the hospital is responsible for, but these are the things the hospital is addressing. So what it comes down to, and the point we're trying to make, is we don't want to say don't bring anyone else in and compete with us. But let's pause and have an honest discussion about, is it going to help or is it going to hurt? Now, I will pass out a report here, and it's not intended to embarrass any physicians in the community, but what is there is the truth. And before I go there, I want to go back and finish my conversation. When our payer mix is down here and we're not getting paid dollars, but we have adjusted, and you pull the cream off what we've already adjusted to, we falter. And I don't know, how many jobs exist in this county? Does anyone know off the top of their head?
I don't know.
Well, let's say for the 834 that the hospital's supporting, it's putting in an $80 million cash infusion. And to lose that, no one is going to come in here and take a hospital out that's losing money. And if they do, what they're going to come in and do, hey, we're going to use this hospital as a satellite, but we can do the billing out in California. We'll send it out there in a computer. We can do the coding out here in Nevada. We can have somebody do the purchasing downtown Indianapolis. Those are jobs gone. In the back of the room are 3 of our board members. And I will tell you, one of the things that I'm proudest that this hospital has done and the board has allowed us to do is in those darkest of days when this hospital was losing money and having to deal with the federal and state issues and having to deal with the loss of Istion, we didn't outsource everything. We chomped at the bit and we kept people's jobs here. People's jobs that paid taxes, they kept their kids in school. That money was brought here because of these people staying here. And they're in high demand. But if the hospital loses and they start outsourcing everything and all they want you to do is come there so they can ship you to another hospital, that's not a hospital. That's a massive clinic. And I don't know how else to put it than an old CEO friend of mine once told a county group, you know, you won't understand what your hospital's value is until you're having a heart attack and the next hospital's 60 minutes away and you have to wait to drive there to get the care you need. That's not a good thing. So we, as a hospital, are dealing with a very low payer mix, and we're being very successful, and we're delivering a high value and a very high amount of satisfied patients. And our write-offs continue to go up, which is some of the magic that the hospital's being able to go through right now. A couple other points that I want to make, and these are equally as important. Not only do we export our labor, but one of the wonderful things we've been able to do and want to continue to do is to bring people back. The hospital is one of the few places where all job categories, from medical doctors like Dr. Rowe back there, to people who have a master's degree like me, to people who have bachelor's degrees and do coding, to people who sweep floors and cook, we're all vital, but not many businesses have that continuum of education working in one building. We do. But one of my commitments when I started as CEO of the hospital was I would do everything I could that when my day is done at this hospital, and as a CEO, the clock's always ticking, I would return this hospital as close as I could to being a county entity run by county people. And let me tell you what I'm talking about. The lady who's being groomed for my job is born and raised here. You may know her as Allison Reynolds. She married a Gates. Her name is now Allison Gates. Tim Lakes, our pharmacy director, was working all over the state. We brought him home. He runs a farm up on the north side of the community. Amy Wynn, who's graduating here in August, will be joining us and coming back home. Not only is she born and raised here, but she'll be the first female OBGYN we've ever had coming home. Amanda Sudhoff, who used to work out of town, was returned and put in the management position here at the hospital. We're talking to 2 other doctors that we want to return here. That's the only way the community's going to get back up on its feet, is to bring these people home and bring those salaries back home. And we're working very hard on that, to get that done. So, one other point and one last point, I'll take any and all questions you have. I've cited 23 sources in here, and I want you to pay particular attention to the gerontological reports about people who won't stay where there's not a hospital when they retire, but particularly about the EDG. Most businesses won't move to a town that doesn't have a hospital, and that's pretty painful. And I'll say this before I surrender the floor. By being able to turn the hospital around, soon to come before you is our request to add 12 more beds to the hospital to create 16 to 20 more jobs for the community. And we're under a very tight time constraint under that. And we'll work with you any way we can on that. But now that we've got the corner turned, we're starting to grow in an intelligent manner of things that can sustain and move us forward and keep this hospital going. And I'm going to close by saying this. If you've ever been to a town that's lost its hospital, you'll know what I'm getting ready to tell you. I'm from a very, very, Google map won't even show you the main street. It's that small. I'm from Lacoma, West Virginia. A speck on a map. About 250 people in an unincorporated town. Looks like Glenwood out here. Back when I was a kid, it reminds me of listening to people of Fayette County talk about this town at one time. You had all these union jobs. We had all these union mine jobs. And I remember as a little boy, you'd get run over in the street if you weren't paying particular attention because it was just that busy and it was just that bustling. When those miners left, that took the right arm off the economic feasibility of the community. When that hospital left because they didn't put up a fight, they didn't understand what they were voting for and voting against, the people in Kentucky who run the hospital didn't understand what it would do to the community, it took the absolute legs out from underneath man in West Virginia. And I will tell you this, we could drive to Man, West Virginia, lay down the street tonight and not worry about getting run over because there's nothing left. There's nothing left. And I don't want that to happen here. So all we're asking for is that there is time to discuss these issues and how they affect what I believe is a true essential service of your community. Any questions?
I wasn't here last time when this was brought up. The facility they were talking about over there, what were they actually gonna build and who was gonna be housed in there?
Honestly, Mr. Flynn, I don't know, but I would, it was never made specific. I don't have, can you make some copies and maybe send out to them later? Y'all share here. What was said in the meeting, and I'm gonna urge you to go back to the video and watch what was said. It was a 30,000 square foot building. And if you listen closely, they tell you they were going to move everything out of the existing plant, which would have created 2 more empty buildings, the condos down the side and the big plant. Our best guesstimate was it was going to be a surgery center. But the thing that you need to watch is this. I asked their CEO, and on camera, the first thing out of his mouth was, no, we don't want to help you operate your ER. Well, that's our biggest area of concern, because once we're gone, where are these people going to go?
To your hospital.
Hospital won't be there if you take the profit line
Yeah.
off.
So they were gonna close the facility across the street?
Don't let me speak for them, but that is the impression I took.
Okay, that was the impression you got.
Well, isn't the surgery part of that now no longer being used?
The surgery part is, but what I'm speaking specifically of, there's a lab in there
Yes.
and the 2 doctors. They talk about moving PT, the lab, and everything else, which would have left only the 2 doctors. You're not going to keep the power and lights on, 3 doctors, I'm sorry. You're not going to keep the power and lights on and all that for 3 doctors without moving them to your new building and putting everything else under wraps. It's just not a good business move.
So you don't have any complaint about competition as long as you're playing on an even field? I mean, and they're
Just
not,
on the even field.
I mean,
That's all I'm asking.
they're not, yeah, be on an even field, yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, I struggled with this, and I met with Mr. White today, and I struggled and struggled and struggled back and forth, and I couldn't, because I didn't want to impede with, competition and so on and so forth, and I came to the conclusion today, after him and I had talked, and I went home and got on the computer, and, my conclusion was, you're not telling people they can't come here, they just want to have a decision, so we're not, I don't feel that we're actually impeding anyone from coming here, we're just making it a level playing field.
Yeah, right, sounds to me.
Mr. White, I had a question for you.
Yes, sir.
You said that you will be part of conglomerates like St. Vincent's. But I seen on your sign you guys have St. Vincent's. Is that like a partnership or is
That's
that part
partnership.
ownership?
One of the hardest things that happen in healthcare right now are finding doctors. There's just a massive shortage. So there's certain ratios, like you only need 1 urologist for, let's just say 15 or 50,000 people. For me to hire one to move to a county of 18,000 people may not be putting a lot of money out there. So we might buy a doctor from them for a day or 2 to come in and provide those services to us. What I was specifically speaking to was this, and that's a perfect example. All the money that's made in Indiana at St. Vincent's, and they'll tell you this, goes to St. Louis to the corporate headquarters. Now, you would think the place that makes the money would get the money back to keep the place going and keep it generating. But understand, the Ascension Healthcare Group is a massive corporation with hospitals in Detroit and St. Louis. And the reason I say that is those are 2 areas that have been decimated by the economy. So it's almost like me, give me all your spare money. Here's your share of his money that he's made to keep your doors open. Here's your money. So you're not replenishing, but you're keeping them alive. And that's the way their corporate has decided to do it. but also with the for-profits, the Columbia, the HMAs out in Naples, Florida, Community Health, Tenet. The money doesn't stay local. It goes to their bank, wherever their bank is, and then if you want a project, you put a proposal together and ask for that money back. Here, we don't have to do that. If I want to do a project, I go to the board and I say, board, here's what we discussed, here's our pro formas, here's the financing. Can we do that? And the decisions are made here locally.
So Gabe, our affiliation with St. Vincent's is as a partner.
Just kind of rent them for a day or two, right?
They're valued partners of us. They provide service in our hospital that we wouldn't otherwise have, and we're working with them to enhance the viability of the healthcare on this side of the state with other hospitals. Pretty soon there will be a helicopter flying on the eastern side of Indiana thanks to our partnership with them. And that's vital, because there's certain things that we're never going to be able to do. And that's important to get people where they need to go quickly as possible.
I did have a question that I didn't ask you today, was you said that there's some charity cases that you bring in, you know, the things where basically you just write stuff off. So, you know, if somebody walks in, they come to your hospital and they get certain amount done in your hospital and they owe you a bill and they just look at you and flat out say, I don't have any insurance and I can't pay. I mean, you still provide that service and say, look, we'll work this out or something, however that goes. Because that's an essential part of even though what we do.
Let's talk about a guy named Nick that digs footers for everybody. Gets paid cash, doesn't make a whole lot of money, hard-working guy, only wants enough money to keep groceries and the TV on in his house. Let's say Nick gets in a horrible car wreck and your 911 system brings him to our ER. Now, the plastic surgeons show up to put his face back together. Dr. Rowe goes in, stops all the bleeding. Pretty soon, between the ICU and all the doctors he's dealing with, he might have a $50,000 bill. Now, that may sound like a lot of money, but we've wrote off much, much higher bills than this. Nick's information will go through the billing department, and they'll attempt to do, look at his W-2s if they exist, his tax returns, any form of income. They'll go through the 9 yards. But at one point in time, you realize that he may have only made $7,500 last year digging footers and has no checking account or investments. He can't pay for a $50,000 bill. So then we fall under the governmental rules and regulations, and the bill gets written off.
Because like you said earlier, when we were talking today, you said in the meantime, while he's paying the $25 a month to pay that bill back, he's going to get sick again, the bill's going to keep. So, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. But, yeah, it's the hospital is a vital part of our community.
Or I'll give you another example, and this was hard. I remember when they were still fighting the Vistion retiree benefits. There's a lot of those people that worked very hard, and they're now in that spot where they might be 60 and they're not ready to get Social Security and they don't have a job or insurance. If that person gets ill and they don't have, you know, they've used their resources to keep themselves and their spouse afloat and make a house payment and a car payment, that bill's going to devastate them. And we work very hard to not make that happen. So like I said, in 08, we wrote off $2.5 million, which is, you know, go to another business and tell them, write off 5% of your bills on top, then still make it happen. It's not just a common business that most people understand.
Question is, two doctors you were talking about, you were trying to bring back, or, you know, were they local people that were from here?
Actually, Dr. Amy Wynn grew up here, went to school. Her mother's my executive secretary, and you know, to bring somebody home that knows the area, wants to be back in the area, is unstoppable. I mean, I hope for the next 40 to 45 years that she's here and she's an absolute pillar of this community. The other one is the valedictorian to Brookville. She's getting ready to graduate next year. Is a lady that we're talking to, and she wants to be in family practice. But there is a gentleman from Connersville. He's in North Carolina right now, and I think will be out of school. He's wanting to be a urologist, which is in massive demand across the nation. We want him to come home because that's a service that we don't have.
Well, I think that's a real vital aspect, that if you can bring hometown people back, that makes it more appealing to the hospital by far,
We're
to the
trying very
local
hard.
community.
And like I
Because-
said,
Yeah.
and like I said, hopefully, the next tier of the senior manager at our hospital will all be locals. That would be my goal. I know my replacement, hopefully, if things go right, her training goes well, born and raised here. She just finished her master's degree, by the way, so we're very happy for her.
Anything else for Mr. White?
That's all the questions I got.
And we're gonna vote on this the next meeting?
Yeah, that's when the public hearing will be set for the next meeting.
Okay. Okay.
And we'll have a nice, clean, legible copy for everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you.
I've got a couple comments. Did you give all the folks the proposed ordinance?
Yeah.
To amend the zoning ordinance? Some of the things you may want to take into consideration when you look at that between now and the public hearing is the title 3674-918.2, and this talks about the Board of Zoning Appeals shall approve or deny all special exceptions, special uses, contingent uses, and conditional uses. And the special exceptions is what we're talking about in this particular amendment. But the law of the state of Indiana provides in that section that the board may impose reasonable conditions as a part of its approval and for a special exception. And what we have now in our ordinance are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 conditions which have been imposed and under statute allowing it to be done. And the ordinance, the statute also provides that only in classes of cases or in the particular situation specified in the zoning ordinance is a special exception required. So for example, a service station, that requires a special exception because there's certain considerations that need to be addressed to make sure it's safe and good and proper in the community. And for example, and you've heard these many times before, like in A, the establishment, maintenance, or operation of the special exception will not be detrimental to or endanger the public health, safety, or general welfare. And then B, the special exception will not be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property in the immediate neighborhood. And all those things we go through to see if a special exception should be allowed or should not be allowed. But what this ordinance wants to do is provide a couple other conditions, standards, I should say, standards as to whether or not a special exception should be granted. And those are the ones that are designated F and G under Section 2, Amendment of Fayette County Zoning Area Code, 153.24, special exceptions in this new ordinance you've seen. And those two are the establishment, maintenance, or operation of the special exception will not be detrimental to the use, operation, or employment levels of existing publicly operated uses which provide services to the residents of Fayette County or municipalities located within Fayette County. And the establishment, maintenance, or operation of the special exception will not contravene the principles of reinvestment and revitalization as set forth in the Fayette County Comprehensive Plan. And if you take a look at the comprehensive plan, it states time and again that those are the two primary issues that need to be considered in the community, and that is reinvestment and revitalization of the community, especially in the existing commercial districts, which, as you know, are to a great extent empty. And the comprehensive plan discourages building of new buildings in various places, but encourages the use of old buildings. And I think that's something you need to consider also. Yeah, that's all I have.
Okay, next up, Director's Report.
I wasn't aware of that. That was in the pile.
I move to accept it as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor of accepting the director's report, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? And director's report accepted. And next, we have adjournment.
So move.
Second.
All right.
Your signatures?
That didn't go well.